All right, guys, so we're going to continue in our discussion of public goods. All right? So we've already talked about the fact that public goods have two characteristics. Remind me what they are. They're non-rival and they're non-excludable. All right? And so we've just defined pure public goods, right? And we understand that there are some impure public goods. We could have some rivalry set in from congestion. We might be able to exclude people from prices like tolls on a toll road, right? And we've also reminded ourselves that markets are going to underprovide, right? Markets are going to always underprovide. So since markets underprovide, right, they're not going to produce and generate enough streetlights, they're not going to have enough roads, we're not going to have very effective national defense if we let the market determine the level of those things. So the markets generally underprovide, so we just said that we're going to have to rely, for the most part, on government provision of these things. So the government generally provides public goods. And we said that we often see a tax and spend approach. So nobody asks me how much national defense I want, but the government's going to deliver national defense for us using our tax dollars. But interestingly, there is a literature on what we call private provision of public goods. So there is a literature addressing private provision of public goods. So are there ways to make it work in the private sector? So are there ways to make it work in the private sector? And in fact, my dissertation research and my research for probably the first 15 years of my professor life was on this topic right here. So are there ways that we might be able to make it work in the private sector? Are there mechanisms, for example, that might make it work? And of course, any mechanism we design has to limit the free rider problem. So one example that I want to talk about illustrates this idea. Everyone with me? So let's take a look at what we call Lindahl pricing. So the idea of Lindahl pricing is that we're going to assign a share of cost. We're going to assign a share of cost to people. And so we're basically looking at a cost sharing approach. So Lindahl pricing is really just a cost sharing approach to providing a public good. But since it's a cost sharing approach, we're talking about private provision. So we're trying to privately provide this public good instead of government. So Lindahl pricing, it's pretty simple. Let's keep it simple. So let's do a simple example with just 2 people. And again, just like we illustrated, once you know how to do it for 2 people, doing it for 3 people, 4 people, 5 people is super easy. All right. So again, let's say that we can provide this at K dollars a unit. So let's just go with a constant marginal cost to keep it simple. And that makes sense, right? If we're talking about street lights, generally there's a constant marginal cost. Now, it could be even decreasing, right? For first 10, we'll give you this price, but if you buy more, we'll lower the price and lower the price. But let's just keep it simple. All right? So let's say that it's $500. So we've said we're going to have a constant marginal cost. And let's say that our 2 consumers, our 2 people, look like this. So nothing new in this graph, right? You've seen this graph before. So the first thing that we have to do, step number 1, is I need to find Q star. Again, Q star is the socially optimal or efficient level. And we know how to do this, right? So how do I do this? How do I find the efficient level, guys, when there's just 2 people? I need to do what? Graphically. What do I need to do on the graph? I need to add them together, right? So I need to take D1 and add it to D2, right? Which is the same as saying I'm taking marginal benefit of person 1 and adding it with marginal benefit of person 2, right? To get the sum of the marginal benefits. Everyone agree? So this is marginal benefit 1. This is marginal benefit 2. Okay, so how do I do it? I start at some level of streetlights. Let's just do it right here. Start with person 1, and then what do I need to do? Add the second person, right? So I need to add the second person. I'm going to do the same thing over here. So everyone's comfortable with that, right? We've vertically added. And then I can, oops, that is not a very good curve. Let me erase. All right, so here's the sum of my demand curves, which is the sum of our marginal benefit curves. All right. Everyone agree that the efficient level is right here at Q star. Everyone with me? So we've done this multiple times, right? At this point you feel really comfortable with this, right? All right, so that's step number 1. Step number 2 is that we now need to assign cost shares to persons 1 and 2. So I need to assign a cost share to person 1 and person 2. And we're going to define those cost shares as C. So CI, C sub I, cost share for person 1, cost share for person 2. And they're going to be equal to the marginal benefit of that person at Q star. So I'm going to define a cost share for each person where that cost share is equal to their marginal benefit at the efficient level. Everybody with me here? So, does everyone agree? These cost shares are going to give me that point right there for person 2. So does everyone agree that person 2 pays that amount right there? And then person 3, again, remember we have to go all the way up. Person 1 rather, person 1's demand curve, right? And over. So here's person 1's cost share, but here's my question for you. Is person 1's cost share the distance between C1 and C2? Is it the distance between? No, because remember his marginal benefit is the height of his demand curve, right? So C1's cost share is that. Everyone agree? So remember guys, we get marginal benefit by looking at the height of the demand curve. So that distance between the two demand curves, that's not what we're interested in, right? All right, so now we have cost shares for person 1 and 2. And interestingly, guys, geometrically, what do we know about C1 plus C2? Look at Q star. What do we know about C1 plus C2? What does it have to be equal to? Does it? Take a look, guys. So at Q star, if I look at C1 and C2 and I add them together, what do I get? I get D1? No. If I add two costs together, I cannot get a quantity. That makes no sense, right? So C1 plus C2 is not equal to Q star, right? We're adding apples and apples. They have to add up to apples. Okay? Does it equal K? How did you get Q star, guys? To get Q star, you started with that point right there, right? And what did you do? You added the height of the second person's demand curve, and you added it right there, right? And that's how we got that purple dot. Everyone agree? So mathematically, doesn't it have to be the case that C1 plus C2 equals K dollars? And what is K again? $500, or the marginal cost of this public good. Everybody with me? So do you see what's going on here? The Lindahl prices, this approach, the Lindahl approach divides the costs in a way so that they exactly add up to the marginal cost of provision, which in this case is K dollars. So guys, if K is $500, then approximately how much is C1 and C2? What numbers can you put on these?
C1's like 400. Yeah, big chunk.
Okay, so what? Give me some numbers. C2's not paying. Okay, so does it look like it might be about 300 and 200? That looks about right? So the difference between C1 and C2, that distance between the two demand curves is how much at Q star? $100, right? All right. So is everybody with me up to this point? So the key thing, guys, about Lindahl pricing is we have to assign a share, a cost share to each person, and that cost share is going to be equal to the marginal benefit, their marginal benefit at Q star. Now, Lindahl pricing has some interesting properties. So there are some interesting properties here. Let's look just at person one. So let's look just at person one. All right? So we're going to need to redraw this graph. All right, so we've got person one. And we've got a Q star that was about here. Let's see if I can get it a little bit accurate. So let's say Q star is about here. All right, so I'm just taking off the other person. And we ended up with a cost share of C1. Everyone agree? Everyone see what I've done? So I've basically, we had a sum of the demand curves that was coming right through here. All right. So we're looking only at person one. So we've removed person two. And I have removed the sum of the demand curves, right? But I had to use the sum of the demand curves to get Q star. Everyone agree? So I've basically just taken my previous graph and lifted off the other parts. All right. So here's what I want you to think about. Question A. What is the total cost paid by person one? What is the total cost paid by person one? And I mean by total cost for Q star units. We've decided we're going to deliver Q star units privately. So Q star streetlights. What's the total cost paid by person one? How would I create an equation? What equation would that be? Can I calculate it? K minus C1? It doesn't sound right. Okay, let's try again. What would be, guys? What would be an equation? If I said, all right, person number one, I need you to write me a check. Let me calculate really quickly what you owe. How would I calculate it? How would I calculate it? Guys, this is not a trick question. Well, you owe C1, and you owe that for each unit, right? And we're going to provide Q star units, right? Everyone agree that's the total cost. This is not rocket science, people. Everyone with me? Now, my next question is, can I see that on the graph? Can I see that on the graph? How would I find that area on the graph? It's going to be a box, right? And that box is going to have a height of what? C1, and it's going to have a length of what? Q star. Everyone agree? So here's my height of Q1, a C1. my length of Q star so this blue box right here represents total cost to person one. Everyone agree with that? Well, now I want to ask question B, what is the total benefit for person one? And again, for Q star units, what is the total benefit? We have other ways of asking that. It could be total value. It could be total willingness to pay. So how would I find person one's total value, total benefit, total willingness to pay for Q star units of this public good?
It's that little triangle.
Be a triangle? Nope. Nope. How would I find his benefits for just Q star? Just that unit.
Would it be K times Q star?
It would not be K times Q star. That would be the total cost of the whole operation, right? K times Q star is the total cost of providing everything.
So
All right,
K
guys.
times Q star minus C times
Stop
Q
guessing.
star.
We can put all kinds of letters together in an equation. It's still not going to make it right. All right, guys. We know this from Econ 217. How do I find marginal benefit from this graph? How would I find marginal benefit for the first street light? His willingness to pay for this very first street light. No. Trey?
Is it where the D1 starts?
Okay.
And it just goes down the more streetlights you add?
So that right there,
Yeah.
I think Patrick said that as well. Is that the willingness to pay for the first street light? And what's his willingness to pay for the second street light?
First increase.
And the third street light? And the fourth street light, or whatever they are. So guys, when I add this all together, what do I get? The total value, which is what? The area under his demand curve, right? So guys, you should know this from principles. Total willingness to pay is the sum of the marginal willingness to pay, which is the area under the demand curve. So it's that area that looks like this. All right, so what do we notice, guys, when we compare this blue area and this green area? What do we notice? The green area is bigger. So if the green area is bigger, what does that mean?
More benefits than cost.
The total benefits are greater than his total cost. Everyone agree with that? So, then what is the difference? What is the difference? So he's willing to pay, I'm just making up some numbers, $2,000, but he only has to pay $1,300. What's the difference called? Again, from Econ 217.
Marginal benefits?
No, marginal benefit is the height of the demand curve, guys. Come on. Y'all are responsible for knowing your basic principles. I walk into Walmart and I'm willing to pay $30 for a pair of Levi's and they're on sale for $20. I just saved $10. I was willing to pay $30. I didn't have to pay $30. I only had to pay $20. $10 remained in my pocket. What do we call that? Consumer surplus. So person 1 has consumer surplus. Everyone agree? If your total benefits are greater than your total cost, then you have consumer surplus. Could we find this area on the graph? We can. That triangle Patrick keeps talking about, but he keeps making it for the wrong things. All right, so Patrick, give it to me. What is this triangle?
Consumer surplus.
This triangle is consumer surplus. So guys, how do we define consumer surplus? If you had to put consumer surplus into a definition, what is it?
Money left over after you get what you want.
Money left over after you get what you want. All right.
Boom! Intuitive.
And we're on the right
You
track.
said explain to somebody that doesn't go in this class. Bang.
Okay, so let's make it a little more precise first. More precisely, consumer surplus is what? The difference between what?
Total value and cost paid.
Okay, so the difference between
What you're willing to pay,
what you are willing to pay
and what you mentioned.
so it's the difference between what you're willing to pay and what?
What you mentioned.
What you actually pay. All right, so guys, person 1 has consumer surplus. Everyone agree? So what do you think I meant when I said that Lindall pricing has some interesting properties? What do you think I meant by that? Look at this approach. What does it guarantee?
Marginal benefits are greater than marginal cost.
It guarantees that marginal benefits are greater than marginal cost. It guarantees that total benefits are greater than total cost, right? When it assigns a share of the cost. Which means what? Which guarantees what? Which guarantees you consumer surplus. As long as your demand curve is what? As long as my demand curve is what?
Below the mark.
What if it is horizontal? What if my demand curve is horizontal? I mean, that'd be weird, a little weird, right? But what if my demand curve is horizontal over this relevant range? Would I get consumer surplus? No. So as long as my demand curve is downward sloping, right? Which normally we think of demand curves as being downward sloping because individual marginal benefit is diminishing. All right, so take a second and look at person 2. Look at person 2. So let's go back to our previous graph. Is the same thing true for person 2? Same thing true for person 2, guys? Does he have built-in consumer surplus? Would you be able to find, so everyone look at that graph and just with your fingers, I don't want to get the graph too messy, but with your fingers, trace out person 1's total cost. Total cost. With your finger, trace person 1's total cost. Person 2. I need to make up my mind, right? Person 2. So we're going to look at person 2, right? Because we just looked at person 1. So look at person 2. Can you find his total cost? Did you go like that? Now, take your finger, can you find person two's total benefit? So does it look like that? My darker orange? Does he have consumer surplus? Yeah. So that's what's kind of cool about Lindahl pricing. That's what's kind of cool about Lindahl pricing. All right, but here's the rub. When we try to implement Lindahl pricing, in the real world, what's going to be a problem we run into? So when we try to implement this in the real world, what problem are we going to run into? Look at what we did. We took person one's demand curve and person two's demand curve. We used them to find the socially optimal level, and then we assigned them a price share. So if I test this out in the real world, what's a problem I'm going to run into? Shortage?
It's hard to know.
You have to know everybody.
Different people have to pay different amounts. And some
Okay.
people might think it's
It's hard to
unfair.
know what people.
So different people have to pay different amounts, and maybe they think that's unfair. Okay. But I'm not even sure I can get that far. This requires me to what?
Know what people are willing to pay.
I need to know what? People's marginal benefit curves. Everyone agree? This only works when I have people's truthful demand curves, right? So we needed, right, D1 and D2. Well, how do we get that information? We're going to have to somehow ask people to truthfully reveal. Their willingness to pay. And in fact, I really need marginal willingness to pay, right? So Patrick, I have this idea and we're gonna build a park in our neighborhood, and here's what I need you to do. I need you to kind of sketch out your marginal willingness to pay for me, because then I'm going to take that and I'm going to assign you a share of the total costs. What's going to happen when Patrick and I have that conversation? What's his incentive?
Make it really low.
Yeah, he's going to kind of lowball it, right? So do we agree that people are going to have that incentive to under-reveal? So there's going to be an incentive to under-reveal. Because Patrick understands that his demand curve directly affects his cost share, right? So is this related to the free rider problem, guys? Is this a form of free rider problem? Sure. So this relates to the free rider problem. So Lindahl pricing is an interesting mechanism. It has nice properties in that it's going to ensure that everyone has consumer surplus, right? And if you have consumer surplus, then it's not irrational for you to agree. But the process of being able to come up with your Lindahl prices, your Lindahl cost shares, require you to truthfully reveal your preferences, and that's where this gets messy. So we're going to still have a free rider problem. Now, my dissertation research was related to trying to change the strategy. Does everyone agree that if we're looking at Lindahl pricing, that people have a dominant strategy, for those of you who have had game theory, to free ride? And if people have a dominant strategy to free ride here, then we're still going to have under provision. We haven't really solved the problem. We might be able to make some headway, But that free rider problem is going to undermine what we're trying to do here. So my research tested out another method. And that method was called the provision point. Instead of Lindahl pricing, we tested something different. It was called a provision point mechanism. And a provision point mechanism created an all or nothing approach. And we're not going to go too far into this, but just so you can kind of understand what experimental economists are doing in the lab. So we created an all or nothing approach, and here's how it's basically set up. And we can test lots of different elements. So let's say we need $5,000 to build a park in our community. So we need $5,000 to build a park in our community. And so what we're going to do, we're going to solicit contributions. Oops, sorry. We're going to solicit, where'd it go? We're going to solicit contributions. And basically the way it's going to work is we're only going to provide if the sum of the contributions is greater than or equal to $5,000. So guys, tell me, how does this type of mechanism change your strategy? We're going to elicit contributions, and we're only going to provide this park in your community if the contributions add up to at least $5,000. But we need to make it basically a one-shot game. For those of you that had some game theory, it's got to be a one-shot game. It can't be a repeated game, because then I have a different incentive. One-shot game. We're going to do this once, guys. So basically, everyone's going to take out a piece of paper. They're going to write how much they're willing to contribute. We're going to add it all up, and if it pays for the park, we get the park. What happens if it doesn't cover the cost of the park? We're done. We're not going to do another round of this. Because if we do another round of this, right, if you know it's a repeated game, I've just changed your incentives, right? So how have I potentially changed people's behavior here? How have I changed your behavior? Trey, what happens?
So you're doing this in like a big group of people?
Yeah, let's just do it in our classroom. Let's say we all live in a community and we have kids and we want to build a park, and this is what it takes, and we're going to do this once, one shot.
You don't want to be that ass that price on $5.
Okay? So right, you might not want to be the jerk that pays $5, but I contend it's even more important than that. Now, I did test that, because I tested what happens if I put the contributions on the board. And now everyone knows you're the jerk that only paid $5. That actually is a really credible mechanism.
Yeah.
That worked really, really well. I published the heck out of that, because people are like, oh, well, isn't that interesting? That's kind of what churches do, right? We're going to put in the bulletin board, what people contributed. Your name's not up there. Oh, Xavier, wow, you're cheap. But is it really simply that I don't want people to know I'm a cheapskate? I mean, that could be part of it. But let's say I'm not even going to reveal what you guys donated. Not even going to reveal. So we're not dealing with a reputation. How have I changed your incentive? How have I changed your incentive? Sandy, how have I changed your incentive here?
If you don't get what you want, if you only get what you want it eliminates the incentive to under-reveal your preference, because if you under-reveal your preference, then it doesn't add up to what you need. So I don't want to lie about it because I actually want it.
Okay, well remember, I'm just asking you for donations, so you don't have to give me your demand curve, but you're on the right track. Guys, has this limited to some degree my free rider incentive? Because if I free ride too much, what happens? We don't get the park. Now, if I didn't care about the park, fine. Then I wasn't really free riding. But what if I have kids and I want this park? Do I have an incentive to free ride if I want this park? No. Because if I free ride too much, then we don't meet this $5,000 requirement. And if we don't meet it, we're not doing this again. So it's not like you say, oh, you know what, I free rode the first time, I was being a jerk, here, let's do it again. Do over, I'll pay this time. It's one shot. So when I tested this in the lab, it was pretty interesting because it changed your strategy. From one that, hey, your dominant strategy, your best incentive is to free ride, to one where I don't want to free ride very much, because if I do, I could be the one that keeps us from getting to $5,000. And then I don't get the park, but I want the park because I've got kids. So it's kind of an interesting situation. All right, let's look at one more thing. So we've been looking at a demand curve where they were below marginal cost. Maybe you guys were thinking, oh, okay, you've kind of rigged this a little bit. So what if, instead of having the demand curves below, what if I have two people that look like this? Person 1 and person 2. And again, marginal cost, K dollars. But remember, this is a public good. We're talking about a private good, then this is not interesting. So again, we're talking about a public good. Do you agree, guys, that we can actually see some potential provision in the market here? If person 1 was operating by himself, do you agree that he would want Q1 units of whatever this is? And if person 2 was just kind of thinking just along themselves, thinking just about themselves, person 2 wants Q2 units. Now, let me ask you this. Is Q1 plus Q2 a market equilibrium? And by equilibrium, I mean, for those of you who've had some game theory, a Nash equilibrium. Is Q1 plus Q2 a market equilibrium? Is it a Nash equilibrium? In other words, a Nash equilibrium means neither wants to change given what the other person is doing. So neither person wants to change. A Nash equilibrium here in the marketplace is that neither wants to change their decision, their behavior, based on what the other person is doing. So let's make it easy. Let's put some numbers in here, 3 and 8. So I want to know, is 8 and 3 a Nash equilibrium? So we have to ask the question here, does either person want to change their mind? Keep in mind, this is a public good. So guys, person 1 wants 8 streetlights. Person 2 wants 3 streetlights. Let's just keep it with streetlights, keep it simple. So together, that would be 11. Is that a stable outcome? Is that an equilibrium? Or does somebody want to change their mind? Anyone want to change their mind? What about person 2? Do they want to change their mind? They want 3 streetlights. Other person's buying 8. So what would they want to do here?
Do they gotta want any?
Yeah. Do they need to buy any streetlights? They only want 3. So, do we agree that person 2 would want to change to 0, given that person 1 is buying 8? Everyone agree? So guys, is 8-3 in equilibrium? It can't be, right? One person would change their behavior. But what about person 1? Would they want to change their behavior? They want 8 streetlights. And person 2 is buying 3. So what would they want to do? Mary Elizabeth?
So they want 5?
Yeah. They would be like, wait, I don't want 8. I want 5, right? So this is person 2. Person 1 would want to change to 5 if the other person's buying 3. So does everyone agree? 8-3, is it in equilibrium? The answer is no. All right, so they've both deviated. Everyone agree? They've both deviated. So this was the first thing. Now we're at five, 0. Everyone agree? So they've both deviated, simultaneously deviated, and now we're at 5, 0. Is this a Nash equilibrium, guys? 5, 0? Is it stable? Is that a stable outcome? Does anyone want to change their behavior? Anyone want to change their behavior? Person 2, do they want to change? They want 3, they're getting 5. Do they want to do anything different? No, so they're going to stick at 0. But what about person 1? How many did they want? They wanted 8, right? They wanted 8. Now they're only getting 5. So is this a stable outcome? Is this an equilibrium? No. So they would want to switch to 8. Everyone agree? So is 5, 0 in equilibrium? No. So we're going to end up at 8, 0. Everyone agree? Is 8, 0 a Nash equilibrium? Is 8, 0 a Nash equilibrium? Yes. But here's my last question for you. 8, 0, is that the socially optimal level of streetlights? Is that the socially optimal level of streetlights, guys? Look at your graph. Is it? To find the socially optimal level, what do I have to do? I have to add the two together, right? And it's going to be like way up here, right? Something like that, right? The sum of the demand curves is going to be something like that. So the socially optimal level is going to be Q star. Everyone agree? I have to vertically add. So the answer is no. So even if I move the placement of my demand curves, do we agree people might want to buy streetlights, but we're not going to end up with the socially optimal level, right? We still have under provision. Oops. We still have under provision. Everybody with me? All right, I think we have wrapped up our discussion of public goods. So you need to make sure you really understand that. I would practice with the graphs. Make sure you understand Lindahl pricing. Make sure you understand the idea of kind of mechanism design. Make sure you understand this last example that we just went over in the idea of a Nash equilibrium. All right, this will be recorded, so I'll post it for you in case you need it. All right, have a great day, everyone.